Oh, hi everyone. Okay, my name is Sue McGregor. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Canada, and I have been asked to speak today about transdisciplinarity. And I thought maybe I'd give you a bit of background how I came to discover it. In 2004, when I was coordinating our peace and conflict studies program, because they had shut down our home ec program, and I'm a home economist. And so I was mentored into coordinating the peace and conflict studies program. And so in 2004, the Canadian Commission for UNESCO had arranged for a public symposium on transdisciplinarity, which I had not heard of before because home economics is interdisciplinary. So I approached and managed to get permission to attend. And at that day, it occurred to me that I could be doing my practice very differently from interdisciplinarity, which is not anything wrong with that, except that it's not enough to deal with what the world now knows as our complex, wicked complex problems. And the more you do to fix them, the worse things get, but you have to do something. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of interests, a lot of conflict, a lot of contradictions, but something must be done. And so there's there's been a movement since the 1970s to try to find some way to deal with all this complexity and struggle and fight with the fragmentation that has become part of our world. Everything is separate and disconnected type of thing. In 1970 in Paris, there was a meeting, and in that meeting, the term transdisciplinarity was bantered around and kind of put out there to the world, and it was a way to push back against the inadequacy of mono, multi, and interdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, pluridisciplinarity. There's a bunch of them because they weren't sufficient to deal with the complexity of the world. So today I'm going to talk about transdisciplinarity, but I'll start out a little bit with being able to recognize it when you hear it. So the way I try to do this sometimes is to use a food metaphor. And so monodisciplinarity is when, obviously when one discipline reaches out to other disciplines to try to get information from them on how to deal with a problem. And the metaphor for that is it could be a bowl of fruit. So it'd be a bowl of apples, for example. And so once the only person doing integration or anything like that is a person who kind of extended the invite and reached out and tried to find information from other people. Multidisciplinarity is when there are two or more people working together. Again, there's no effort to take down boundaries between disciplines or anything like that, but people are working together on sharing each other's perspectives on an issue, just putting everything kind of on the table. And the fruit metaphor for that would be a bowl of fruit. So you might have apples or just bananas and grapes. So they're in a bowl and they're mixed together, but you can still clearly see each discipline. They haven't changed, their identities haven't changed, the boundaries around them haven't changed, anything like that. Interdisciplinarity is quite often mixed up with transdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity is between multiple disciplines, between one or two disciplines or among several disciplines. And someone pulls together a group and builds bridges so they can come together and work together. And their intent is reciprocal, beneficial arrangements between everyone. Integration is key. They're trying to come up with something new. It could be new theory, a new method, a new approach, a new procedure, sometimes even new disciplines like bioethics, for example. But the key thing about those three, and there's cross-disciplinarity, there's pluridisciplinarity, there's post-disciplinarity, and it goes on, is that they're still within the academy. They're still within the university. There's no connection at all, problem-solving wise or problem addressing wise, with civil society. There is just the university. So when you move on to trans university, and the food metaphor example for interdisciplinarity would be a stew, for example. So you can see, when you look in the stew, you can see bits and pieces of different disciplines, for example, carrots, potatoes, onions, etc. Maybe soft, a little fuzzy around the edges, so because they've been trying to blend and cross and deal with each other. But the stew itself, the thick mucus liquid, that's kind of something new that was created when they all came together, and something new came out of it that didn't exist before through synergy and synthesis and integration. When you're doing transdisciplinarity, you are moving far beyond the academy, and you are now dealing with what's called civil society, but it's more than that. Civil society is NGOs, education, just people in the communities, etc. In addition to working with government, in addition to working with industry, and you bring all those multiple minds together to work on a complex, wicked problem. And the metaphor that is quite often used for that is a cake. So you can bring all those people together, and they work on something together. There's a chemistry and an energy that comes from mixing everything together. And when you're done, you have an entirely new product. You cannot recognize any of the original parts anymore, but you wouldn't have a new product without the parts. So that's kind of the food metaphor for that. From 1970 onward, there were there are four kind of organized approaches to transdisciplinarity right now. And one is, I hope I say his name right, Bastrap Nicolosu, and he developed what's called a methodology, which is a new way to create knowledge. An approach came out of Zurich in the 2000s, and there's a more pragmatic approach where science still leads things, but science does itself differently. Science is done in connection with society, with technology, facilitating the exchange, etc. And so it's called an interface between those three sectors. And the third approach, it came out of Russia. It started in the 1990s, but it didn't kind of come to the English-speaking world until the 2000s, when the two architects of that decided to start publish papers in English. And they view transdisciplinarity as an entire new discipline. They call it a meta-discipline. And it should be in its own faculty, its own department. You graduate students that are transdisciplinary systems, transdisciplinary specialists. And that, I just became aware of that like a couple of years ago. And then again, a couple of years ago, I became aware of a fourth approach, which is coming out of Brazil by a gentleman there. He works in public policy, public administration, and he sees transdisciplinarity as a theory. So when you hear the word transdisciplinary, if what you're reading talks about disciplines, and nothing about connecting with the world to make the world more whole and to unify and create new unified knowledge, you're not dealing with transdisciplinarity. You're dealing with other modes of disciplinarity, but you're not dealing with trans, because trans takes it far beyond the academy into the world. Just very briefly introduce you to Nicolosu's approach. And the way I usually approach his work is I use a lava lamp as a metaphor. Now, his approach to transdisciplinarity is grounded in what's called the new science, and that's quantum physics, chaos theory, and living systems theory, complex adaptive systems. And his methodology, he formulated it intentionally, is based on four axioms, which the other three dominant Mises methodologies are as well, which is empirical, interpretive, and critical. And they're based on epistemology, which is what counts as knowledge and how you come to know it. Ontology, which is what counts as reality and existence. Logic, which are rules that we use for our reasoning and making judgments. And axiology, which is the role of value in knowledge creation. And Nicolosu's approach is, and he pushes back against the fragmentation within the academy, the fragmentation of knowledge in the world, reductionism, and exclusive logic, which means that and/or thinking, dualism, that type of thing. He pushes heavily back against that. One of his critiques in one of the books I read, he's a prolific writer, is that there are apparently over 8,000 different disciplines in the world, and they tend not to talk to each other, so let alone talking with the world. So he draws, like I say, he draws on principles from quantum physics and quantum thinking and chaos theory and living systems theory. And if I use the lava lamp as a metaphor, he assumes that reality isn't just one reality, one level of reality, which can be discovered using the scientific method. He assumes that there are two levels of reality. One he calls the transdisciplinary subject, which is where information and consciousness flow. And that includes individual, which is psychological and physiological, family, kinship, community, geographical locales, political, which includes the politics and the ideologies, and historical type of thing. And the other levels of reality are what he calls a TG object, which is where objective information flows, facts, statistics, that type of thing. And that includes economics, which is law and business as well, the environment and ecology, technology, which includes science and medicine, planetary, which is planet, global, worldwide, and cosmic, which is universe and multiverse, and quantum theorist. And back in the late 80s, when he started formulating this, it was very difficult for science to work outside of science. So it took me a long time to figure this out, but his approach is kind of what home economics was doing all along anyway. And a lot of people as well figured out that you have to find some way to bring divergent minds together that are antagonistic and contradictory and stuff. If you can't bring the people together to talk, then nothing can happen. But that was unusual, for very radical at the time, to say that science should work with anything outside of science. So what he was struggling with was a way to try to formulate this into a methodology that people could use to create complex knowledge that's needed to deal with complex problems. So I'll use the lava lamp. So again, to come back to his ontology, what he proposed, and we know this works, is that he has two levels of reality, and the way you get people from objective and subjective to work together is he created what's called the hidden third. And it's kind of like the middle person. I don't want to say middleman because it's gender. And so we need something to lubricate and to open up people's minds. So when they get together, they can be open-minded. They can be willing to listen to other points of view and perspectives, even though they're against theirs, and be open to changing their position if it's warranted. So his hidden third is his way of saying, we need a way for people to step out of their boundaries into what he called the zone of non-resistance, which is simply a space where people agree that they will be open to other people's ideas. And he said that needs to be somehow lubricated and mediated. So he said, we can do things like art, drama, theater, music, culture, connecting with nature. He called that the sacred. Spirituality, which is internal meaning for people. Religion, which is an external organized belief system, and faith. And combinations of those things can help people take down the barriers between each other so that they can start to talk to each other. And back in the day when science was totally done with just science, this was quite far out there. But the rest of us know, I mean, people that are dealing with peace and conflict around the world, they know that music is a universal language, drama, art is a universal language. And he just saw this as a way for science, technology, spirituality, and humanness to come together. So if you accept that notion of ontology, I'm going to use the metaphor of a lava lamp and explain his epistemology, which is what counts as knowledge. Now, in empirical science, the only thing that counts as knowledge is that which is created using the scientific method. It's called positivism. The only way it can be positive that it's the truth is if it was created using the scientific method. He says knowledge is 4 characteristics, all from the new science. It is complex, and complex in his mind doesn't mean complicated, but complex to him means interlaced strands, intertwined or braided or plaited. Complex means woven, and simple is not the way we understand it. So he uses a lot of lay language and puts different twists on it. So TD knowledge, transdisciplinary knowledge, in his opinion, is complex. And part of the complexity means that complex adaptive systems is that people, when they're working together, will self-organize and things will come out of their interactions without someone controlling it from the outside. And so they leverage small little things over a period of time to lead to a big result. So that's the knowledge is complex. It's emergent, which they assume that something will come out of it. Knowledge is believed to be alive, always in hyphen formation. Information is always in formation. It's embodied, which means everybody who co-created it owns it. And it's cross-fertilized, which means many sectors work together to facilitate the exchange of information and new things come out of it. So with the lava lamp metaphor, if you can picture, it's a moving floor, and people willingly, hopefully, step out of their sector, whether it's civil society, industry, government, academics, and they step into the lava lamp onto an undulating moving floor. And when they're in there, they're dealing, let's say they're dealing with the issue of poverty or climate change or population growth and that type of thing. They're in there dealing with or building a dam, etc. They're in there working together, sharing their perspectives, sharing their points of view, their interests, their concerns, which are informed by their ideologies, etc. And they're bouncing off of each other as they're working with each other in here. So relationships change, people change, the information changes, and an energy is formed. It's called fusion, and I called it intellectual fusion. And if you're in the lava lamp, there's wax, it's moving, and eventually something will perk up to the top of the lava lamp. And you've seen that happen if you watch them. And it sits there, and then it comes back down and falls down onto everyone who co-created it. So when you're doing transdisciplinary work from this perspective, knowledge becomes embodied, it becomes part of everyone who co-created it. So it's not sectoral bound anymore. It's not disciplinary bound anymore, person bound anymore. And if people co-create it, there's a chance they're going to be able to co-use it when they leave. So that's his notion of knowledge. He proposes that in his methodology, as far as logic goes, that people will draw on two types of logic, not exclusionary logic, but inclusive logic, which means that they agree to engage in such a way that they recognize contradictions, antagonistic, varying perspectives, and they're willing to listen to each other so they can eventually have something new emerge from this. So it's called inclusive. Nothing is excluded because it could be a key part, integral to the solution that they try or eventually come up with. It allows the barriers to come down and voices to be heard and listened to. They use complexity logic, which means to plate or weave things together to take those new bits and put them into something brand new that didn't exist before, which is called transdisciplinary knowledge. And his axiology axiom, the role of values, Nicola Osher didn't think there should be an axiology axiom because we differed on that. But the way I've come around to reconcile it is that when you have all these people step into the lava lamp and they're working together on this really messy, wicked, nasty problem, they'll each come with their own value sets. And as they're in there working together and bouncing off each other, and synergy is happening, and synthesis is happening, integration is starting to happen, what he called a transdisciplinary value set will emerge. And that can include things like humility and respect and trust and empathy, cooperation, tolerance, accountability, a collective wisdom, commitment, collegiality. Once those morph and become set and accepted by the group, that helps the work go forward. So he's proposing that transdisciplinarity is universities, civil society, government, and industry coming together and working to create brand new knowledge that didn't exist before and couldn't exist before if it stayed just within the academic setting. So when you're reading work, I'm not going to name all the names now, but it's a tip. Go to the reference list first and see who they're citing. If you see Nicolaugeau's name, then you'll know that they're drawing on his approach. If you see Klein and Nowotny, their names, they're drawing on the Zorich approach. And you can do the same thing with the Russian and with the Brazilian approach. There, you will see their names in the reference list, and that gives you a hint of how they're understanding what transdisciplinarity is. But the takeaway from today is to be able to recognize it, I think is what I'd like to leave with you as a message. If it's just talking about disciplines, it's not trans. Trans means zigzagging back and forth, going beyond, going into a new space. It's transcendent. Transcend means to climb up and go over into a new space. And transdisciplinarity that's done truly like it's intended will be a connection between academics and the rest of the world so they can find and create unified knowledge that didn't exist before to address really complex and wicked problems. Thank you.